Hey guys, tonight we slip barefoot into the dust-gold dawn of the Nile Valley, where the air still holds that cool shimmer before the sun decides to roast everyone alive. You're about to meet a group of people with a surprisingly calm and sticky job, the beekeepers of ancient Egypt. Imagine this, rows of mud brick hives stacked like loaves of bread in a courtyard, bees humming like a tiny choir warming up, and you standing there trying not to sneeze because you know 1,000 little striped soldiers will take it personally. You probably won't survive this if you run screaming, so best to stay calm and pretend you belong here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, post your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The courtyard smells of Nile mud and faint honey sweetness. You hear roosters crowing in a jumble of notes, as if competing with the first bees already nosing their way out into the daylight. The keepers, men in indigo wraps with linen belts, rise early, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Their job is quiet, unhurried, yet strangely high stakes. Egypt's kings demanded honey for offerings, priests needed it for ritual lamps, and households wanted it in medicine and bread. If these bees failed, whole temples would frown. You trail along as the beekeepers push aside reed mats covering their hives, long, horizontal clay cylinders stacked neatly. Smoke drifts from a small pot filled with dried dung and desert herbs, a trick as old as patience itself. The smoke makes the bees sluggish, less likely to sting, though one or two still test your skin. You slap at your arm, then realize every keeper just ignores the buzzing as if these tiny arrows can't touch them. Fact is, beekeeping was already ancient here when the pyramids were young. Inscriptions in the temple of the sun god at Abu Ghurab show men kneeling to collect honey, jars neatly sealed. Historians still argue whether Egyptians were the very first beekeepers or if Mesopotamia got there first, but either way, these hives have been humming for thousands of years. The Nile itself plays accomplice. Every year the floods leave behind thick carpets of flowers and herbs. Bees return dusted in gold pollen, dancing across the hive entrance in patterns you half wish you understood. A keeper points, chuckling softly. To him it's obvious. The bees are telling each other, "Hey, acacia blossoms are blooming upriver." To you it looks like someone doing bad interpretive dance after too much beer. A quirky little detail slips into your ear. Some Egyptians believed bees were born from the tears of Ra, the sun god. When Ra wept, his tears hit the ground and became bees. That myth hovers in the background as you watch the keepers tend their colonies, almost as if each buzzing worker carries a tiny spark of divinity. It's a charming thought, though you suspect Ra probably didn't plan on you flinching every time one zooms by your ear. The keepers work slowly, gently tapping the hives, checking clay plugs at the ends, and murmuring under their breath. Bees need calm hands, not clumsy grabs. A single dropped hive could ruin not just the day but the season. You notice small wicker baskets stacked against the wall, lined with linen, ready for honeycomb when the time comes. A jar of water sits close by, not for drinking but for the bees. In the desert heat, even sacred insects need a sip. As the sun climbs, light glances off the mud walls, throwing long honey-colored shadows. The hives hum louder, and the whole courtyard feels like a beating heart. You breathe in slowly, half entranced, half nervous. Your shoulders loosen a little as you realize the beekeepers themselves seem oddly at peace. They laugh at your tense posture, as if they've seen outsiders panic before. Maybe to them, this is less a job than a quiet covenant with nature. Of course, not everything is serene. Bees sting. Sometimes whole colonies collapse for reasons nobody understands. Termites nibble at wooden lids, floods drown hives, and once in a while a swarm decides to abandon everything and head for a palm grove instead. That's the risk. Your livelihood can fly off in a golden cloud. You marvel that the beekeepers don't shout or curse when this happens. They shrug, adjust, and start again, because what else can you do when your coworkers have wings? You squat near a hive, press your ear close, and hear the colony's vibration, low, constant, like the throat song of an invisible choir. It's strangely soothing. Maybe this is why the beekeepers keep their tempers in check. If you listen long enough, the hum settles into your bones. It feels almost like the bees are breathing for you, carrying your thoughts away in their endless circuits between flower and hive. And that's how you find yourself, dusty knees and all, easing into the ancient rhythm of the day. Bees lift, circle, dart, return. Keepers check hives, stack jars, stir smoke. You stand there, part of it, part of the Nile morning, a guest in a trade older than kings. The odd truth? Amid the stings, the heat, the crocodiles waiting in the river nearby, you actually feel at peace. And that, perhaps, is the real mystery of Egyptian beekeeping. The Nile heat thickens, and the courtyard grows loud with 1,000 wings rising into the air, yet the keepers remain deliberate, unhurried. You trail behind one of them as he prepares to harvest honey. There's no giant metal extractor here, no plastic frames clicking into place, just mud brick, reeds, and hands that know every inch of these hives. He kneels, indigo cloth brushing the dust, and slips a clay stopper from the end of a hive. The air fills with that unmistakable scent, sweet, sharp, golden, like warm syrup poured straight from sunlight itself. You lean in, wide-eyed, as he gently slides a chunk of comb into a wicker basket lined with linen. The bees, understandably outraged, whirl around his head, but he only blows softly, mutters something under his breath, half charm, half habit, and keeps working. Historians still argue whether these mutterings were simple coaxing or fragments of ritual chants meant to soothe the insects. Either way, you're tempted to try whispering, "Nice bees, good bees," yourself, though you doubt they'd buy it. The honeycomb glows in the morning sun, hexagons glistening, sticky rivulets trickling down his fingers. You imagine a modern supermarket aisle and laugh a little. Here, there's no sterile jar with a cartoon bear on the label, just raw, fragrant comb that oozes sweetness and wax. And yet, this very product once traveled across deserts on camel caravans, sealed in clay jars, traded for silver, copper, or exotic spices. To Egyptians, honey wasn't just food, it was medicine, offering, even currency. He passes you a small shard of comb, maybe out of pity for your sweaty patience. You bite, and it's like chewing on liquid sunlight trapped in wax. It sticks to your teeth, coats your tongue, and carries the faintest whisper of desert herbs. You wince at the wax but grin anyway. Your cheeks stretch sticky as you mutter, "Worth it?" Nearby, another keeper tends to a pot set over smoldering dung. Thin trails of smoke drift lazily, curling over the hives. The smoke doesn't just calm bees, it also keeps curious flies at bay and adds a faint earthy tang to the honey, though you suspect that's one of those quirky side effects never advertised. Imagine selling jars labeled "Notes of Clover and Cow Dung Smoke," probably not a bestseller. Fact: in temple records, honey appears over and over again. Priests used it to sweeten cakes offered to gods, to preserve fruits, and even to embalm the dead. Yes, you heard that right. Mummies may have been given a dab of honey alongside the usual resins and oils. The logic? Honey never spoils. Archaeologists have found sealed jars of Egyptian honey thousands of years old and still edible. You glance at the comb in your hand, chew again, and think, so technically I could be sharing dessert with a pharaoh right now. The work continues with jars, tall, narrow, clay vessels lined with faint traces of beeswax. Honey is poured carefully, sticky ropes stretching between comb and pot until snapped with a twist. The jars are then sealed with clay or linen and stamped with marks showing their temple or household origin. You realize each jar is like a time capsule, carrying the Nile's flowers across months, maybe across continents. And here's a fringe tidbit that makes you smirk. Some texts hint that honey might have been mixed with crocodile dung to form a kind of primitive contraceptive paste. You pause, look around at the buzzing bees, and try not to imagine the trial and error behind that discovery. Let's just say you'd prefer to stick with beeswax candles rather than experiment with dung-based anything. Your guide leads you to a small storeroom, its cool shadows lined with jars. He places today's harvest among them, rows of vessels glowing faintly in the dim light. It looks like treasure, each pot a golden fortune, stacked neatly against mud walls. And in a sense, it is treasure. Honey could pay taxes, settle debts, and grease palms of officials faster than silver coins. A child scampers in, carrying a reed scoop, and dips it into a jar when no one is looking. The keepers laugh quietly. They've all done it. You remember sneaking spoonfuls of peanut butter as a kid and suddenly feel less removed from these ancients. Some things never change. Still, the harvest isn't without danger. The bees grow restless, swarming angrily. One keeper receives a sting to the cheek, barely flinches, and keeps working. You, on the other hand, sweat at thin air like a drunken swordsman. The others chuckle, one mutters, "New blood," and you blush. They carry their stings like badges of patience. You wear yours like a mosquito bite with too much drama. By noon, the courtyard hum has shifted. Hives are resealed, smoke has drifted away, and the keepers stretch in the shade of a fig tree. Jars sit cooling, lids drying. You realize the rhythm here is ancient, unbroken. Morning, tend bees. Late morning, harvest. Noon, rest. Repeat, season after season, year after year, until the Nile itself changes course. And as you sit there, licking the last stubborn bit of honey from your fingers, you understand why Egyptians prized this golden gift so fiercely. It wasn't just food. It was the sweetness of life preserved in clay, the taste of sunlight stored in wax, the closest thing to immortality you could chew. The sun climbs higher, and with it, you follow the beekeepers into the village. The path is narrow, shaded by mud brick walls where hieroglyphs have been scratched with casual artistry. Someone doodled a falcon, another carved a half-baked attempt at their own name. The air smells faintly of dust, smoke, and, oddly enough, warm honey. The wicker baskets sway gently as the beekeepers carry them, shoulders strong from repetition. And while you might expect villagers to gather around like kids at an ice cream truck, they treat this procession with calm reverence, as if golden sweetness were as much a part of life as the Nile itself. You step inside a modest courtyard where clay jars line the walls, their mouths sealed with mud or beeswax. Inside, layers of honey glisten in the dim light, thick as amber resin, waiting to be used. This is where the beekeeper's role shifts from harvester to supplier, offering his product to priests, healers, and housewives alike. You picture one woman scooping a spoonful into a small bronze bowl, stirring it with powdered herbs to make a cough syrup. Another smears a thin glaze onto flatbread, and suddenly breakfast turns into a feast. Honey wasn't just a sweet treat, it was calorie-dense fuel for farmers and laborers whose lives burned out fast under the desert sun. Of course, some jars have a loftier destiny. You notice a scribe collecting sealed pots for temple rituals. Honey was considered the tears of Ra, the sun god himself, spilled upon the earth as a gift. Historians still argue whether this poetic myth came first or whether someone just really wanted an excuse to raise temple taxes with a divine backstory. Either way, honey ended up an offering to gods, smeared across altars or poured into shallow basins where it mingled with incense smoke. You imagine the bees would have approved, unless, of course, they'd prefer the humans leave their tears alone. In a side room, you see honey being mixed with oils. A healer dips a reed spatula into the golden blend and applies it to a wound on a farmer's leg. The cut looks angry, the kind you'd expect to fester in days without antibiotics, but the honey acts as a shield, drawing moisture and keeping infection at bay. Quirky fact? The Egyptians even packed honey into bandages placed on the dead during mummification. Apparently, even corpses deserved the deluxe antibacterial treatment. Next time you put honey in your tea, just remember, it's also part of the original spa package for eternity. But the oddest use might be in the form of a birth control recipe. Some surviving texts mention honey mixed with crocodile dung, pressed into a pessary. You shudder at the thought. It sounds more like medieval slapstick than medicine, but it shows just how versatile this golden goo was. And if you're rolling your eyes right now, don't worry, you're not alone. Modern scholars raise theirs too, while quietly wondering whether there was some hidden logic we just don't understand. Through all this, the beekeeper stands with quiet dignity, watching his product transform from comb to cure, from offering to ointment. His apron, if you can call a linen wrap an apron, is still dusted with flecks of dried mud. His hair is sweat-matted, but his expression is calm. He doesn't boast, doesn't sell himself, doesn't even haggle much. The work speaks for itself. You get the sense that in a village where bakers, potters, and fishermen all hustle to earn their bread, the beekeeper occupies a strangely serene middle ground. His labor is dangerous, yes, but his reward is sweet, steady, and divine. Outside, children chase each other with sticks, barely sparing a glance for the bees drifting overhead. For them, this is everyday life, not something exotic. They know honey will be there at the table, or in the healer's jar, or in the temple. That familiarity comforts you too. It's as if the hum of bees has always been background music to human history, even if you've forgotten to notice it in your own time. The beekeepers share a meal, flatbread dipped in honey, washed down with beer that smells a bit like sour grain. You sit with them in your imagination, chewing slowly, savoring the mingling of bitter and sweet. It's simple, nourishing, and just a little sticky. You glance at your own fingers, half expecting to find honey clinging to them, and laugh at yourself. If ASMR ever existed back then, it would have been the quiet crunch of bread, the faint buzz of bees, and the slosh of beer in clay cups. By the time the jars are sealed and delivered, the sun is slipping lower. The beekeeper's shoulders slump, but not from defeat, from contentment. The job is done, the honey safe, the bees already rebuilding. And you, tagging along invisibly, feel oddly at peace too, as if some of that calm has seeped into you just by watching. Evening settles like a blanket across the Nile Valley, and the beekeepers gather once more, not in the fields this time, but along the riverbanks. You can almost smell the wet silt, dark and rich, carrying the faint tang of fish and reeds. This is where their craft expands beyond honey. It's where beeswax steps onto the stage. In your modern mind, wax is something you drip onto cupcakes or stick in scented candles at home, but here, it's currency, medicine, and magic rolled into one golden lump. The beekeeper kneels beside a shallow clay pan, heating comb scraps over a small fire of reeds. The wax rises in glistening yellow pools, floating above the water as impurities sink. He schemes carefully, tilting his head with the same seriousness as a jeweler cutting diamonds. A crooked reed spoon scrapes the golden layer into jars, and suddenly this humble beekeeper looks like an alchemist, transforming messy hive leftovers into material prized by priests, craftsmen, and healers alike. You notice a boy at the edge of the firelight. He holds a thin stick, dipping it into the wax, pulling it out, dipping it again. Slowly, the layers build into a candle, thick, lumpy, but functional. You smile. It's basically the world's first DIY craft project, minus the glitter. Egyptians weren't candle fanatics, though they used oil lamps far more. But when wax was molded into tiny ritual candles or even into figurines used in magical rites, its glow wasn't just practical, it was mystical. Historians still argue whether ordinary folks ever used beeswax candles for simple lighting or whether it remained purely sacred. Either way, you can picture one of those stubby little candles flickering in the dark, its flames soft as breath. From the temple nearby, a priest arrives, robe of saffron linen fluttering in the evening wind. He requests wax for sealing jars of sacred oil, for coating papyrus scrolls, and, here's the quirky bit, for making tiny wax figurines used in protective spells. Some figurines represented enemies, melted ceremoniously in fire so their power dissolved. Imagine being cursed by a beekeeper's side hustle. That's one ancient Yelp review you don't want. In another corner, a healer mixes warm beeswax with fragrant herbs and resin, kneading it into a balm. He smears it onto a burn victim's arm, the golden salve catching the last rays of sunset. Honey may have been the superstar, but wax was the quiet backbone, sealing, preserving, healing. It clung to surfaces the way stories cling to memory, stubborn and enduring. You trail the scene further upriver where fishermen unload their catch. Some exchange tilapia for wax cakes, bartering as though golden lumps weighed equal to silver. And why not? Wax was durable, transportable, and useful. A bit like Bitcoin, except you could actually rub it on a wound. As night deepens, the villagers gather for a small festival. Oil lamps flicker, Children chase each other with reed torches, and you notice a peculiar practice. The beekeeper offers the priest a honey cake glazed with wax. Not edible, mind you. This one is symbolic, a charm for prosperity. The crowd laughs, but their laughter is affectionate, not mocking. The beekeeper isn't just tolerated, he's treasured. In a society where scribes might claim intellectual dominance and soldiers claim brute dominance, this quiet worker commands respect through patience and persistence. A breeze off the river makes you shiver, even though you're only imagining. The beekeepers pack up their tools, leaving behind the faint smell of melted wax and smoke. You linger a moment longer, watching how the firelight reflects in the jars of wax, making them glow like captured sunlight. And maybe that's the secret of beeswax. It's like bottling the sun itself, to be released whenever needed. You smirk at the thought. If some ancient influencer had been around, they'd be hawking RA-approved glow capsules made of beeswax, 5 debens a pop, link in bio. And somehow you'd buy them. The river hums with frogs, insects, and distant songs from a passing boat. Your eyes grow heavy, lulled by the rhythm. But before you drift off, the thought sticks. In this world of pharaohs and pyramids, the beekeeper remains small yet vital, turning buzzing chaos into sustenance, medicine, and light. That's a kind of magic no monument can rival. Morning light spills over the desert horizon, soft gold brushing across fields of emmer wheat and patches of flowering clover. You follow the beekeepers into farmland now, where their buzzing allies aren't simply producing honey but are working overtime as pollinators. It's one of those details that gets overshadowed by the sweetness of honey jars, yet it's arguably more important. Without bees carrying dustings of yellow pollen from blossom to blossom, there would be fewer dates, fewer figs, and fewer fragrant herbs. You can almost see the chain reaction. No bees, no bread, no beer, no buzzing civilization. A beekeeper in russet linen squats near a grove of blossoming date palms. He rubs pollen between his fingers, checks the hives nearby, and nods with quiet approval. It's not modern scientific observation with charts and data, but it's close, a farmer's intuition sharpened by years of watching seasons repeat. He knows when bees are strong, fields thrive. He knows when hives are weak, harvests falter. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians consciously understood pollination as we do, or whether they just noticed patterns without naming the mechanics. But either way, they leaned on the bees like you lean on Wi-Fi, always working in the background, invisible until gone. You catch sight of a line of oxen pulling sledges stacked with clay hives. Yes, moving hives, basically the world's first mobile pollination service. The Egyptians floated hives along the Nile, chasing seasonal blooms north to south as crops ripened. Imagine entire barges filled with bees drifting lazily downriver, buzzing like living cargo. A nightmare for anyone allergic, but ingenious for agriculture. The quirkier detail? Ancient texts even mention disputes over whose bees pollinated whose crops. Basically, the world's first neighborly lawsuit, only with more stings. You step closer to a patch of onions and leeks, staples in the Egyptian diet. Bees dart between their tiny white blossoms. A farmer in indigo linen lifts his hand in gratitude to the beekeeper, recognizing that today's soup owes something to yesterday's buzzing. In exchange, he offers a bundle of fresh herbs. It's barter, but also acknowledgement of dependence. You can plow with oxen, irrigate with shadufs, but without pollinators, nothing grows. Further along, children run through fields, chasing bees with reed baskets. Not to harm them, but to capture and release, like a game. Their giggles cut through the hot air, and you realize, even kids knew bees were valuable. They weren't just insects to swat, they were coworkers, tiny golden employees who never asked for wages beyond blossoms. You smirk. Imagine if HR departments today had to manage bees. Employee retention rate, 98%. Main complaint, occasional smoke exposure. As the sun climbs, the beekeepers pause for shade under a fig tree. They sip from clay cups of diluted beer, their conversation a low hum that blends with the bees themselves. You lean against the tree trunk, imagining the way bees stitch together Egypt's patchwork economy. Honey in temples, wax in medicine, pollination in fields. All interconnected, like threads in a linen shroud. Pull one thread, and the whole thing unravels. You picture scribes recording harvest tallies on papyrus, lines of numbers reflecting grain in granaries. The hidden factor behind those numbers? The invisible labor of bees. You want to whisper this to the scribe, "Give the bees some credit, man," but of course, the scribe just dips his reed brush in ink and keeps writing, oblivious to the buzzing chorus outside his office. By late afternoon, the fields shimmer in the heat, mirages wavering above the soil. A donkey brays, bees drone, children nap in the shade, and the beekeeper stretches his back with a weary smile. You sense a rhythm here, one that doesn't change much across centuries. Farmers today still watch the sky, still worry about pollination, still mutter curses when crops fail. The accents shift, but the questions remain. Will the flowers bloom? Will the bees come? Will there be enough? The beekeeper rises, brushing dust from his saffron tunic, and sets off toward the hives. You follow, lulled by the cadence of bees weaving invisible lines between blossoms. For a moment, you almost feel their wings brushing your cheek, delicate, urgent, essential. And you realize, in this ancient land of stone temples and towering monuments, the quiet hum of bees might be the most important sound of all. Dusk cools the edges of the desert, and you find yourself ushered into a quieter corner of the village, this time, not the fields or temple courtyards, but a shaded household chamber where jars line the walls. Here, the role of bees takes on a more intimate flavor, literally. The air smells of herbs steeped in honey, thick and sweet, like medicine and dessert rolled into one. The beekeepers have handed their treasures over to healers, and suddenly, bees are not just farmers' helpers but doctors' assistants. A healer in a teal linen robe stirs a clay bowl of honey mixed with crushed garlic and a sprinkle of powdered malachite. He dips his finger, tastes, and nods with satisfaction. You wince. Garlic and coppery mineral dust don't exactly sound like candy, but in this world, it's a cure for infection. Ancient Egyptian medicine leaned heavily on honey, prized for its antibacterial properties long before anyone understood microbes. Wounds were smeared with honey and bandaged with linen, like an ancient neosporin. And yes, archaeologists have unwrapped mummies whose injuries were treated with honey poultices that lasted thousands of years. Your modern medicine cabinet suddenly feels less cutting edge. Nearby, a mother crushes dates into paste and mixes them with honey, rolling the mixture into small pellets. She tucks one into her child's hand, instructing him to swallow. It's both candy and medicine, soothing coughs and calming stomach aches. The boy grimaces at the sticky sweetness, then grins, cheeks sticky. You chuckle. Some things never change. Kids still hate their medicine, even when it's basically dessert. Historians still argue whether Egyptian healers truly separated medicine from magic or saw them as the same thing. One papyrus might describe honey as a physical remedy, while another prescribes it in a spell to ward off evil spirits. Was it science? Was it sorcery? The truth is probably both. In a world where gods controlled the Nile and illness could strike without warning, why wouldn't you smear honey on a wound and whisper a charm at the same time? On a low reed mat, a priest-physician recites words over a jar of honey before smearing it across a burn. The honey glistens in the lantern light, golden as the god Ra himself. Bees, it seems, were seen as messengers of the divine, creatures born from Ra's tears according to one myth. So, when you swallow a spoonful of honey in this room, you're not just treating a sore throat. You're sipping liquid divinity. You roll that thought around your head and can't help smirking. Imagine advertising honey today as tears of the sun god. Sales would skyrocket. In another corner, a scribe records recipes: honey with crushed lotus for chest pain, honey with coriander for stomach cramps, honey with sycamore fig for fertility. The list stretches long, part cookbook, part pharmacy, part spellbook. One quirky detail: honey was even used in eye ointments, though you grimace imagining sticky lashes and bees buzzing too close. Still, papyri describe it as soothing irritation, the same way you might today use drops of artificial tears. You step closer to a shelf of sealed jars, their stoppers coated in beeswax to keep them airtight. Inside, honey glows amber in the fading light. Some jars are destined for the temple, others for the marketplace, but many will remain here in this healer's chamber, waiting to be spooned out as remedy, offering, or ritual. It strikes you how versatile honey is: food, medicine, spiritual medium. In Egypt, it was the duct tape of daily life, sticky, useful, and always on hand. The healer finishes his work, washing his hands in a wooden basin, beeswax candles flickering nearby. He glances at you as if to say, "See? This is why we keep the bees safe." You nod, realizing that every sting risked, every jar hauled, every smoker puffed, wasn't just for sweetness on bread. It was for lives saved, wounds healed, prayers answered. Outside, the last light fades, and the desert air grows cooler. You hear bees settling back into their hives, their hum softening like a lullaby. Inside, jars glimmer in the lantern glow, guardians of both flavor and cure. You breathe deep, the air thick with sweetness, and think to yourself, maybe the real magic of Egypt wasn't in colossal temples or towering pyramids, but in something as small as a bee making honey. Night has folded over the desert, and instead of silence, you hear the faint shuffling of sandals along a packed earth path. The beekeepers are not asleep yet. Their day may be over, but their duties stretch into the rhythm of rituals. You trail behind them into a small courtyard lit by oil lamps, where offerings are arranged on low tables. Honey, in this sacred hour, has left the realm of medicine and entered the domain of the gods. At the altar, a priest in indigo linen unwraps a jar, its lid sealed with beeswax. He tilts it slowly, pouring thick golden honey into a shallow bowl carved from alabaster. The liquid gleams in the flickering light, so luminous you half expect it to glow on its own. Around him, worshippers gather, their hands lifted in reverence. To them, honey is more than food. It's a vessel of purity, a substance believed to carry the essence of Ra, the sun god himself. Egyptians told the story that when Ra wept, his tears fell to earth and transformed into bees, who then gave humankind honey. You glance up at the dark desert sky and imagine the stars as droplets of those celestial tears. Another offering is prepared: honey cakes baked earlier in the day, small golden-brown discs carried in wicker baskets. A young girl places them on the altar beside the honey jar, and the smell of sweetness mingles with the smoke of incense. You smile, thinking this could easily double as a bake sale, except the customers here are gods and ancestors. Historians still argue whether honey was offered daily in temple rituals or reserved for special festivals. Some inscriptions suggest constant offerings, while others hint at honey being precious enough for rarer use. Either way, what's clear is its role as a bridge between human and divine. When you pour honey into a bowl before a statue of Horus, you're essentially sending an edible prayer skyward. Quirky detail: honey wasn't just for gods, it was for the dead too. In tombs, jars of honey were sealed and placed beside mummies to sustain the departed in the afterlife. Archaeologists have actually found honey in tombs thousands of years old, still edible. Imagine cracking open a 3,000-year-old jar and drizzling it on your toast. It might taste a bit smoky, but technically, it's fine. You chuckle at the thought of vintage honey, circa 1500 BC, on a modern menu. A chant rises, low and rhythmic, as priests smear honey along the lips of a statue, ensuring the god's mouth is opened to receive offerings. The gesture is tender, almost parental, as though they are feeding a child. You recall the healers using honey for wounds earlier today, and it strikes you how seamlessly honey weaves through every level of Egyptian life: body, spirit, community, cosmos. As the ritual continues, a young novice tends to beeswax candles. He carefully trims the wicks and replaces spent wax with fresh, the smell of warm beeswax filling the courtyard. The flames dance gently, their golden light echoing the honey on the altar. It's a sensory chorus, the sweetness of honey, the smoke of incense, the glow of fire, the drone of prayer. You feel your shoulders loosen, your breath sinking with the hum of ritual. A small boy sneaks a honey cake from the basket when the priest's back is turned. He takes a bite, grinning, and the sweetness sticks to his lips. You laugh under your breath. It seems even sacred offerings can't resist a little thievery. Maybe the gods don't mind. After all, who wouldn't want to share dessert? The ritual concludes with the honey left before the statue, incense smoldering into the night. Worshippers disperse quietly, some carrying jars of leftover honey to their homes, believing its power lingers long after the prayer. You linger too, watching the candles flicker against the mud brick walls, the beeswax scent softening into the cool desert air. Walking back through the alleys, you think about how this single substance has stretched itself across so many purposes. A bandage, a dessert, a divine gift. No wonder beekeepers carried a strangely peaceful reputation. They weren't just farmers. They were custodians of something otherworldly. By tending bees, they kept not only bellies full and wounds clean, but also gods satisfied and ancestors comforted. Not bad for a day's work surrounded by stingers. You glance at the night sky, where Orion leans above the desert, the same stars Egyptians once charted in honey-stained notebooks of papyrus. Maybe you think honey is just another kind of starlight, gold poured into jars, destined to remind mortals of their connection to the heavens. The night deepens, but your eyes refuse to close, carried forward by curiosity. You follow the memory of honey through another layer of Egyptian life, one less polished than temple altars, yet no less vital. Honey was not just a sacred luxury, it was also a form of wealth, a currency that passed between hands, sealed in clay jars, and scribbled in records of trade. Picture yourself in a bustling market at dawn. Stalls of reed mats and wooden tables stretch down a long avenue. Farmers unload sacks of barley, fishermen lay out baskets of tilapia, and somewhere in the chaos, a pair of beekeepers stand proudly with their honey jars. They tilt one forward to catch the sun, and instantly, the golden contents outshine everything else in sight. It's as if they've bottled sunlight and are daring you not to notice. Merchants crowd around, voices rising in haggling chorus. A jar of honey, thick and pure, might trade for an armful of onions or even a slab of copper. Historians still argue whether honey functioned more as a barter item or as a quasi-official tax payment. Evidence from temple archives suggests both. Some families paid portions of honey directly to officials, while others swapped it in everyday exchanges. Either way, honey circulated like edible gold, its sweetness ensuring value in every household. Quirky tidbit: Egyptian texts mention honey as part of workers' rations. Imagine hauling stone blocks for a pyramid all day and getting your weekly pay, bread, beer, onions, and if you're lucky, a dab of honey. One worker probably bragged, "They paid me in sugar sunshine today," while his buddy rolled his eyes, stuck with plain onions. You grin, realizing ancient wage complaints probably sounded the same as modern ones. As you weave through the market, the smell of honey mixes with sweat, fish, and baked bread. A scribe in a saffron robe pauses to note transactions on papyrus scrolls. His reed brush dips into ink, recording how many jars went where. Somewhere in those tidy hieroglyphs, your jar of honey joins the flow of commerce, as real as gold or linen. Later, those records might wind up in temple storage, where future archaeologists would stumble upon them and scratch their heads, debating whether honey was just food or semi-currency. Spoiler, it was both. You imagine a caravan setting out from this market, donkeys laden with jars of honey strapped in reed baskets. They trek across desert paths, bound for distant towns along the Nile. At each stop, honey might sweeten beer, seal wounds, or appease minor gods. In this way, bees became tiny economic engines, their labor echoing far beyond their hives. You picture one donkey groaning under the load, thinking, all this for sticky juice? Really? And you can't help but laugh. Back in the market, children dart between stalls, fingers sticky from dipping into jars when merchants aren't looking. Honey is irresistible, and the scoldings that follow are half-hearted at best. Parents know their kids are tasting what everyone values, from pharaohs to peasants. That taste carries meaning, a shared indulgence that cuts across class divides. Historians still argue whether Egypt's honey trade extended beyond its borders. Some believe jars traveled into Nubia and perhaps further east, while others insist honey spoiled too easily for long-distance export. The debate simmers like a pot left too long on the fire. You lean toward the image of honey caravans reaching distant kingdoms, because it feels poetic, tiny insects influencing diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange. As you wander from the market, you notice how honey functions as a social glue. It oils the gears of barter, fuels workers' stomachs, and dignifies ceremonies. Unlike grain or cattle, honey carries an aura of magic with its practicality. Owning jars is like holding status, a subtle brag slipped into household stores. The beekeeper, once thought a humble farmer, starts to look like a quiet power broker. Night edges back into your awareness as you imagine the jars sealed and stored, their wax caps glowing faintly in lamplight. You think about how honey lasted thousands of years in tombs, but it also lasted, in a smaller way, through every exchange, every hand that passed it along. Honey wasn't just preserved in jars, it was preserved in memory, in custom, in the language of economy itself. You smile, realizing that the next time someone hands you a dollar bill, you'll secretly picture an Egyptian beekeeper squinting proudly at a jar of golden syrup. Currency, after all, is just trust made visible, and who wouldn't trust something so sweet? Your journey stretches further into the night, and with it, your mind drifts toward how beekeeping lingered not just in jars and markets, but in the stories and symbols that wrapped around Egyptian life. Honey may have been sticky, but its symbolism was even stickier. It clung to religion, art, and imagination with a persistence no broom could sweep away. You picture temple walls shimmering with painted reliefs, lines of hieroglyphs etched beside depictions of pharaohs in indigo and saffron robes. Among the many offerings piled at their feet, bread, beer, onions, birds, there are little jars capped with wax. These are honey jars, and their inclusion isn't just practical. To the Egyptians, honey embodied purity, sweetness, and eternal preservation. They believed the gods themselves partook of it, that honey was divine food dripped straight from heaven. The image alone makes you wonder if bees were considered part-time delivery workers for the gods, buzzing through life like celestial couriers. Historians still argue whether the bee hieroglyph meant king, because of its association with Lower Egypt, or if it symbolized broader divine authority. Either way, the bee was stamped firmly onto Egyptian identity. The king of Upper and Lower Egypt often bore the title, he of the sedge and the bee, weaving buzzing insects directly into the throne's legitimacy. Imagine modern leaders trying that, president of the flag and the honeybee. It's catchy, but probably wouldn't win votes. There's another layer of oddity. Egyptians connected bees to the sun god Ra. According to myth, when Ra wept, his tears hit the ground and turned into bees. You can't help but smirk. Out of all the things for divine tears to morph into, buzzing insects take the prize for most unexpected. It's like a cosmic inside joke. Yes, mortals, my sadness makes stingers. Still, the myth neatly ties honey to sunlight, tears to sweetness, grief to nourishment. Your mind lingers on how layered symbolism can be, even in something as simple as a drop of honey. And honey wasn't only for gods and kings. It became woven into funerary practices too. Imagine standing in a dim tomb, the air heavy with incense and the scent of resin. Among jars of beer and dried fish sits a sealed container of honey. The Egyptians believed it would nourish the departed on their journey through the afterlife. Archaeologists really have found 3,000-year-old honey still edible. You imagine some bold grad student, spoon in hand, whispering, "For science," before tasting it. Joke aside, that longevity fed the symbolism. Honey equaled eternity. Quirky fact: honey even made cameo appearances in Egyptian love poetry. Verses compared kisses to honey's sweetness, lips to dripping combs, desire to sticky gold. Suddenly, the same substance smeared on a wound was also pressed into romantic metaphor. It makes you chuckle. Ancient Egyptians were basically leaving their equivalent of cheesy Valentine's cards, but written on papyrus instead of pink stationery. The symbols carried forward, echoing across time. Bees appeared in amulets, their tiny wings etched into faience charms. These weren't just pretty trinkets. They were believed to ward off harm, perhaps because bees themselves fiercely defended their hives. The message was clear: small things can protect big treasures. You picture someone wearing a bee charm like a medieval knight with his shield, except this talisman buzzed rather than clanged. Historians still argue whether beekeeping rituals were themselves sacred acts or simply agricultural chores elevated by context. Were beekeepers considered temple servants, maintaining divine food stores? Or were they just farmers with a side hustle? The debate sits unresolved, like an unopened jar sealed with wax. You tilt toward the idea that, at least some days, beekeepers felt like priests of sweetness, each hive a little altar humming under the sun. The more you think, the more honey starts to feel less like food and more like language. It spoke of wealth, of love, of eternal life, of divine sorrow turned into buzzing creatures. Each jar was a sentence, each spoonful a phrase whispered across centuries. The fact that you're still hearing it now, curled under a blanket millennia later, proves how well that language stuck. You glance back through the long path you've walked tonight, the clay hives, the smoky harvests, the medicine jars, the bustling markets, the divine titles. Each piece adds to a mosaic where bees are never just insects, honey never just sugar. It's both humble and exalted, both everyday and eternal. You start to think that maybe the Egyptians were onto something. Maybe ordinary sweetness deserves reverence. And so the scene softens. Temple walls glowing faintly, hieroglyphs of bees shimmering in torchlight, jars of honey sealed against the centuries, waiting. Somewhere in the shadows, a scribe sets down his reed brush, stretches and mutters, "Sweet dreams, little bees." You exhale, feeling the symbolism wrap around you like silk. You drift deeper, past hieroglyphs and temple jars, into the quiet realization that the story of Egyptian beekeeping has always been less about insects and more about people, ordinary hands shaping sweetness into survival. The image of a beekeeper leaning into a clay hive under the desert sun comes back to you, but now it merges with something broader: bakers folding honey into dough, healers stirring it into cures, lovers scribbling it into poetry, priests pouring it before the gods. Every jar you imagine seems to hum with voices layered on top of each other, each whisper saying, "We were here." There's something oddly comforting about knowing bees linked these lives across centuries. A farmer in russet linen in 2000 BC swats at a bee near his ear, and 3,000 years later, a museum visitor in jeans does the same in a garden outside Cairo. The gestures rhyme, bridging time like a shared wink. Historians still argue whether Egyptians domesticated bees fully or just coaxed them along, but either way, those hives kept buzzing, proof that collaboration between human and insect outlasts empires. One last quirky tidbit floats up: beeswax figurines were sometimes used in magic rituals. shaped into tiny effigies for spells. Imagine a beekeeper handing off wax for a love charm, shrugging, "Don't ask me what for." You laugh softly at the thought, because somehow this job balanced on the line between sacred work, household craft, and supernatural supply chain. Few professions can say the same. And so, as your mind slows, you see the arc, from clay hives to temple offerings, from battlefield medicine to love poems, from honey jars sealed in tombs to amulets tucked into pockets. You realize you've walked not just through history, but through a texture of human life, sticky, fragrant, buzzing, enduring. The sweetness lingers on your tongue even now, as though you dipped a finger into one of those ancient jars. The desert night folds around you again. A breeze stirs the acacia trees, soft as the brush of wings. The stars above are steady and patient, the same ones beekeepers once glanced at while setting out their jars before dawn. You picture them, hunched in the half-light, smoke curling, bees circling like notes in a forgotten song. Their voices may be gone, but their hum endures, tucked into every drop of honey you taste today. It's not about pharaohs or monuments, not about armies or wars. It's about continuity in small, ordinary acts, the kind you perform without fanfare, but which ripple across centuries. Saving a letter, teaching a child, stirring sweetness into bread. These are the true monuments, invisible but resilient. Beekeepers never carved their names into stone, but their legacy glows all the same, golden as sunlight caught in a jar. And you, lying here in the quiet, are part of that chain. The fact that you're listening, imagining, remembering, means the hum continues. The bees fly on, not just in fields but in your thoughts. Their story is yours now, folded into the soft edges of night. So let yourself exhale. You've walked far, through hives and temples, through laughter and debates, through honey both sacred and silly. The buzzing fades into a gentle vibration in your chest, steady as a heartbeat. The jars close, the wax seals shut, the torches dim. All that remains is stillness. And now, slowly, you ease back from the desert, from the hives, from the golden jars. The story softens, dissolves like honey stirred into warm tea. You don't need to chase details anymore. They've settled, sweet and quiet, on the shelves of your memory. Your body feels heavier, like sand sinking into the dune's embrace. Each breath comes slower, deeper and calmer, carrying with it the faint hum of bees that has lulled you across centuries. The heat of the Egyptian sun fades into a cool, velvety night. Overhead, the stars are no longer sharp pinpricks. They blur into a glowing haze, as though painted in gentle brushstrokes across the sky. The bees themselves retreat now, curling inside their hives, wings folding into silence. You can almost hear their collective sigh, a whole colony settling into rest. The keepers, too, step away, their scorched aprons and wicker baskets set aside, their day's work done. The torches gutter out, and only moonlight remains, silver and steady. You are safe here, wrapped in the same quiet the Egyptians once knew when the fields hushed at dusk. Safe, small, part of something enduring, yet unburdened. The jars of honey wait, patient and unspoiled, but you don't need to reach for them. Their sweetness is already with you, woven into the rhythm of your heartbeat. So let go. Let the hum dissolve into silence. Let the desert cradle you, the stars keep watch, and the bees dream their golden dreams. You've traveled far, and now the journey is done. Rest now, drift softly, sleep deeply.